switch me over. Right. Right. So, John always starts, he says, with a poem by John Masefield, who was, of course, famous for his sea stories and sea poems.
Stick that on there somewhere.
Right, okay. It's called Cargoes. Quinquereme of Nineveh from distant up here, rowing home to haven in sunny Palestine, with a cargo of ivory, apes and peacocks, sandalwood, cedarwood and sweet white wine. Stately Spanish galleon breaking in here. I hate the thought of Spanish galleon. The galleon was not Spanish. It's a British bloody invention, the galleon. Sorry. Coming from the isthmus, dipping through the tropics by the pale green shores, with a cargo of diamonds, emeralds, amethysts, topazes, and cinnamon, and gold moidores. Now we get to the real action part of it. Dirty British coaster with a salt-caked smokestack, butting through the channel in the mad March days with a cargo of tine coal, road rails, pig lead, pine wood, ironware and cheap tin trays. Of the 3 times when Britain, or more specifically England in the first case, England and Wales, and then England, Wales and Scotland, and finally England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have been rich. It's been on a series of different industries. First wool and woolen cloth. Then railways and the fairly rudimentary products that made the railway run. And finally by sea power. And it's not purely the fact that we had a navy that was bigger than the next 3 put together most of the time. We were the world superpower of the age. But at least half of that was based on these little coasters, the steamships. They said they were built by the mile and cut off by the yard. And for most of that time, they ran on coal and they ran with reciprocating engines. And that's precisely how Freshspring started in 1946. Here we are. This is the kind of ship we're talking about. More at the start of the First World War, more than half of the whole of the world's shipping flew the British flag. So what's Freshspring? Well, Freshspring is a water carrier. When ships are in harbour, steamships at any rate, normally they will need to keep at least 1 boiler in and be running the auxiliaries and not the main engines, because they want electricity, they want heat, they want light. To generate steam, you need clean water. Not necessarily distilled water, although at sea a ship will usually top up her water tanks by distilling water. But Freshspring carried the water from ship to ship. Here we see her, or one of her sisters, alongside an aircraft carrier. I don't actually know which one it is, but I can tell you that this is one of the Colossus or Majestic class, because it doesn't have the big heavy 4.5-inch guns of the fleet carriers. So she's about a 17,000 ton, 20,000 ton aircraft carrier. And there's Freshspring, or one of her sisters, alongside, supplying her with the water that she needs for the boilers and for the crew. You don't want to get dipping water out of and processing water out of a harbour. Because in those days, probably not so much now, where did the waste go? The gas was chucked over the side and you carried on like that. So there she is doing her job. Because she carries nearly 400 tons of water, she has a second job. She helps with firefighting. She spent 15 years in Malta. During that time, she moved from being fired by coal to oil fire. She has a single Scotch boiler. Scotch is not actually anything to do with the potable stuff. It actually is about the way it's constructed. This is a fire tube boiler where the hot gas from the furnaces goes through pipes to boil a big tank of water outside it. She runs at about 140 pounds per square inch pressure on steam. Now that's not a particularly high level. I mean, as you can see, I'm involved with steam railways, and even from the beginning of the 20th century, they were probably running at least 180, more likely 250 pounds per square inch. This is low pressure. The difference is that the steam engine, locomotive engine, wastes all its water. What you see coming out of the smokestack of those is almost entirely water vapour. Now with a ship like Freshspring, it isn't. It will be the products of burning, as I say, originally coal, later oil, and when she was actually retired, she went to the docks in Bristol, where a lot of work was done on trying to produce fuel from waste. It didn't do a lot of good being there. Just about everything that wasn't bolted down was stolen, and if it was bolted down, they cut away the plating round it and stole that too. The binnacle, the steering gear, all of that, everything on deck was ruined. So much so that in the end she had to be moved. And they moved her out to Newham on the Severn estuary. Not a good place for a steamship. Not only is she still in salt water, which is never good for the plating, but she also faced the Severn bore. You can see the state when she was actually moved out of the main river into the Pill, which is at the side. She looks a bit tired and unhappy there, doesn't she? But the reason she had to be moved in there is because of this. When the bore comes up, it hits the ship and she grounds. And it made holes in the hull, and she was reaching a point where A, it would have been difficult to save her if she'd been let go much longer, and B, the man who'd let her sit in that pill for years needed it back. So there she is lying alongside. Actually, above the waterline she wasn't bad, but it came to a point where she had to be moved. After a lot of strain, they managed to find a place to put her at Bidford. Now that's what she looks like. The plan. The ballast tanks, fore and aft, are to make sure that she trims correctly. You don't want her down by the head or too far down by the stern. And you can see the water tanks, freshwater tanks. That's where she carries the water that she's actually designed to move around the place. The bunkers, well, that was the coal, later oil. So what's been done since she got there? Well, they got some money from the National Heritage Fund, which allowed them to move her. Grants from the local councils around Bidford. And she had to be dry docked. She was actually dry docked at Sheerness. Sorry, Sharpness. She's now safe in Bideford for the time being. What are we doing with her? Well, we're not just trying to preserve her, we're trying to use her to do something. What we're trying to do is teach youngsters, firstly, about the history, but secondly, that there are still a lot of careers, a lot of jobs going in maritime industries. We want to get her back sailing again. There are a relatively small number of sea-going steamships left. The principal one is actually Shield Hall, which is known as the Bovril boats. They used to take some sewage sludge and drop it out at sea. They took passengers, and when you were actually discharging the sludge overside was when they were all inside having their tea. To get away from the stink. So there she is in dry dock. They found a number of holes, which I knew about, and they patched those. Now this is only a temporary job. We cannot take her to sea with patched over holes. They will need to be cut out and new metal laid into them. But this is, there she is being water jetted, getting her ready for the next stages. And there, she's got a nice coat of undercoat on. Now, although she was owned by the Navy, she never wore battleship grey colouring because she was an auxiliary. First for the RFA, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, and later for the PAS, Port Auxiliary Service. Because she spent a lot of time, as I say, in Malta, and from there she moved to the Gairloch, where she serviced the ships that used that part. As you can see there, she is being patched up. I think you can see on that, they're actually putting one of the patches in place. And that's what she looked like after they'd done that. That's more like it. That looks more like a ship, doesn't it, rather than a wreck. But you'll notice there's still one or two things about this. This brown structure here surrounds the bridge, which was unusable at that stage, because it's in such a ruined state that we just had to cover it up, patch it up, seal it in so that we could do things with her. So from there, she's taken under tow down to Bideford. Now there's quite a lot still missing of this ship. As I say, the bridge is not there. She should have a mast. There's all of other things that she should have and hadn't at that stage got. Here she is arriving and we're starting work on her. Most of the gear inside is in pretty good order. One thing that did have to be done right at the beginning, before she could be moved, the rudder was jammed over to one side. Now, it wasn't necessary to have it working, but you can't have it pulling the ship off to the side all the while. You'll never get anywhere. So that had to be broken loose. And they had to check that the screw wouldn't fall off. But they're actually held on with keyways, but you don't want to lose that. That's a massive piece of bronze, and it's bloody expensive to replace bronze. These days, any non-ferrous metal, it's horribly expensive to replace. There she is, and you can see we've got some scaffolding up and some nice posters around what will be the bridge. One of the first things that we managed to do is actually the crew's quarters. As you can see, bunk beds, lockers. She would never have had a very big crew, probably 8 13 crew, 8 would be able to sleep in one of these areas. But when she was converted to oil firing, you didn't need all 13. Not only is it much harder to load coal through 3 holes into a furnace rather than turn on taps, but that coal has to be moved from one end of the bunkers to get it ready to go in. So you not only have stokers, you have trimmers, and their job is to move coal around the place. And it is a vile job. Coaling a ship, everybody used to have to take part in it. They always finished absolutely filthy. They used to say that in the Navy, you didn't want to serve in a coal-fired ship if you could possibly avoid it. Often what they did was they filled the bunkers with people still the other side of the coal, and then had to drag the coal out so they'd escape from the bunker. Here we are, the main engine. Now this is a triple expansion engine. So that means it's actually got 3 cylinders. High pressure, intermediate pressure and low pressure. Now they always have the same length of stroke. The piston moves the same distance on all of them. But to deal with it, getting the most out of the steam, we start off with an 8-inch cylinder for the high pressure. That takes a lot of the energy out of the steam. So we then move to an 18-inch cylinder, which takes for the intermediate pressure, which takes a lot more out. And finally to a 30-inch cylinder to get the last out. Now on bigger ships, they would normally have used 4 cylinders, 2 low pressure cylinders. And in fact they did for a short period around the time of the introduction of the turbine engine, which is roughly 1900, 1905, around there. They actually used quadruple expansion engines. Or, in the case of vessels like the Titanic, they had triple expansion engines running the outer screws with a central screw run off exhaust steam turbines, which were running probably only about 10 pounds per square inch of pressure. That's actually a bit misleading because they exhaust to a condenser which drops them to -15 from atmospheric. And that was providing nearly half of the power for a ship like Titanic, Britannic, Olympic, whichever one it was that was sunk. And there is an argument about that. But that's how it works. You can see here you can see what's happened. The battery. Oh, that right. Here you can see the telegraph. You always hear, or you tend to hear when you hear anything about a steamship, the order going down, full steam ahead, full speed ahead. No. You don't use full, you use half ahead. Because you don't want to strain everything. Full speed and full power are emergency things. You're more likely to use full astern than full ahead. Because there's something ahead, you want to stop. You want to stop. Because even a smaller ship as Freshspring takes a fair bit of stopping. Here we are working in the bridge, reinstating the wheel. Now, the wheel on a ship like this works through gearing and chain or wire or a mixture of the two, which actually turns the horizontal motion of the wheel into vertical motion of the wheel into horizontal motion, which actually turns It's a bit like the car. It's not quite, it's actually less complicated because you don't have to keep the wheels in the same place, which you do with the cars. That's why you have all the dips and all that kind of stuff. But there we are, working on her, getting her. All volunteer labour. Now, mostly they work every Wednesday and every Sunday. During the summer, she's open to visitors, but this time of year, she's not so much. So, what's been happening recently? Well, she has been dry docked again, and there is actually a report from the surveyor about the state that she's in, over on the table over there with the magazines. Now, she would have been open to the public earlier than she has been, but a thing called COVID intervened, which meant we couldn't really do it. We've got 3 part-time staff now, and she works, I say, she was dry docked at Appledore. This is one of the smaller shipyards. These were critical both to the construction and the maintenance of our ships. They're not the big Harland and Wolff works, things like that. They're little ones. They might build a ship of 500 tons or something like that. A lot of these were scattered, not down the west coast, where your Tyne-built and Clyde-built ships tend to be found. I know not the Clyde, but it wasn't in the concentrations. It wasn't in the concentrations of Liverpool, Birkenhead. They were up in Barrow-in-Furness and down there. And these were towns that suffered most terribly during the period after the First World War, when ships were not being built. What ships were coming through were old ships being repaired and sent out again to do other jobs, because there's so many ships built for the war. So, one thing you might like to do is, if you'd like to have a look at the Freshspring website, you will find on there is a virtual tour which will take you around the engine room and other parts of the ship. All of her auxiliaries, the water pumps, the generators, everything, the feed pumps, all of that is steam driven. So when she's not running, when she was working, if she wasn't running, you still had to keep the boilers going, which actually restricts the lifetime of the ship. That's why these ships, this type of ship, mostly spent their time in the dockyards, because there they could be maintained and kept going. There would be more than one of them available at any time. Here we have some of our mighty volunteers. You'll see on this one she's actually wearing a version of the red ensign. Since then we've actually got permission for her to wear the blue ensign of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, which is not quite what she wore, because most of the time she was Port Auxiliary Service, but it is an appropriate ensign for her to wear. One of the things that we've been lucky to have is volunteers who own things like miniature rollers, miniature traction engines. So part of the fundraising has been done by them going to fairs, steam fairs and things like that, charging for rides. When she's open to the public, we do actually make a charge, but it is fairly small. But virtually everything we've had in the way of grants has all been on the basis of matched funding. You raise 100, we'll give you 100. You raise 10 quid, you only get 10 of us. Yes, youngsters. This is the critical thing for what we want to do with this ship. Onboard education, and when we can get us steaming again and sailing again, taking them out to sea, teaching them about how ships work. Okay, she is reciprocating engine, and that's not really what people are doing these days, but there are plans. There are plans for her to, this is one of the projects that can be broken down, and they go from school to school, fully documented for the children to put together and learn how these things work. We've got links with the local universities and colleges and the local schools to allow us to bring this kind of thing to them, bring them on board to do part of it, and then take these kits away, do them in their school, and we get them back at the end, we break them down again, and they can go to another school, keeping it going all the way through. There you are. This is one of the Lloyd's number. Every ship that was built in Britain, and many that were built overseas, were registered with Lloyd's. That means Lloyd's certified that that ship was a fit thing to go to sea. There are others, Bureau Veritas and things like that, but this is where term A1 comes from. An A1 vessel means that it's fit for all uses and all waters, virtually. I told you we lost haven't really got the wheelhouse. Well, here is the new one being built. As you can see, decent piece of timber being built there. Yeah. It was then put together, cleared away all the stuff that we had there, that box. You can see there on the you can see that we've got the parts of the wheel ready there, but not everything. And there it is, arriving by lorry to be craned onto her. Looks decent, doesn't it? It's pretty much exact copy of what she would have had, as far as we can make it. But then, of course, it has arrived, it has to be loaded on. You see at the back here, you can see electrical control gear there. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a minute. Another thing that was missing I told you about, there it is being craned down. Yes, make sure you're not actually underneath it when it lands. And there it is, being fastened into place. Looks pretty good. That's after it's been fastened down, you can see the rows of bolts where it's actually fastened to the steel, and it's been varnished in the correct colour. Whoops! There we are. Right. So there she is. That having been done. The next thing that we found was that the steel deck is good, but the overlying timber wasn't. It needed replacing. So hence, all this timber being loaded on board. And here you can see the timber decking being reinstalled. And this is when she went to Appledore and was dry docked for the second time. It gives you a pretty good picture of what she looks like. She's a tubby little thing, but she's good for her job. I mean, she'd only do 8 knots, but when most of your time is spent trotting around from ship to ship within a harbour, you don't really need to be doing destroyer speeds, do you? They're built for their function, and they're fit for function. And that is one of the critical things that we seem to have forgotten, that function and form go together. We have to have everything flash and shiny nowadays, and it isn't really always necessary. But she is being fitted with photovoltaic cells and a control panel. Because the final idea is that you will be able to run through an electric motor driven from either the steam engine, or from diesels, or from batteries and photocells. And that will be the final drive system that will drive home. So this is the circuit diagram, or the mimic diagram. The battery bank. Of course, batteries have long been a critical part of ship propulsion. For submarines, underwater, they did try steam engines, and that wasn't very successful. Sometime you might like to look up the history of the K-class submarines. And of course they had diesels as well, or in the earliest days we had petrol engines. But the trouble with that was petrol fumes within there, that they were getting drunk on the fumes. But yes, batteries, yeah, we can do that. Here we are again with the our volunteers, and they're sitting on a fairly large piece of square timber. So what's that? Well, that's what it became. It was a mast. And there it is installed. And now to go back. This was the first stages of the mast. We were given the tree. Then they squared the tree off. Then that became the thing that these guys are sitting on. It's actually not a terribly difficult thing to square off timber. But to get a decently round mast out of a square piece of timber, you actually need to make 1 or 2 gauges which have long outer pins and short inner pins, and what you do is you go down it, you gouge it, and you take down to the level of the inner ones, and you do that repeatedly round and round, getting smaller and smaller steps until finally it is sufficiently round for your purposes. But yes, it's a wooden mast. It's got steel fittings on it, of course. It's basically a wooden mast. You see there it is. And up here we have the masthead, well, it's in the masthead light, but light. Almost anything that steams or uses other motive power, when it's at sea at night, will have a white light at the top. Sailing vessels don't, they just show the red and the green side lights. And all of you show a white light at the stern. So at sea, seeing a single white light tells you virtually nothing. It could be anything from a vessel at anchor, one coming when you can't see the side lights yet, or the stern light of another ship. So that's one you always have to watch for. Now this is the bridge. These red and green lumps here, they're iron. What they are there for is to balance out the attraction, the magnetic attraction of the ship. So this is a magnetic compass, which of course the ship affects. One of the jobs you have to do pretty much every time before you set to sea with a ship with magnetic compasses is you have to swing the compass. You have to go round in a circle, in a known position, taking bearings at a known point, and you write out a deviation card. When it's 10 degrees off the port bow, actually, the compass will tell you it's 17 degrees off. So you have to, that has to be borne in mind when you're calculating where you're going to sail. And where you, knowing where you're going, of course, which tends to be quite important. Now, we'll go back to that one. There at the back you can see the wheel, and at the side here you can see the top end of the telegraph. All of this stuff, except the very bottom of the wheel arrangement here, the steering arrangement, all of this was stolen when she was in Bristol. Everything that they could take, they did take. So, the next thing was, it's a bit bleak to get kids on board in the rain, things. We could do with an awning. Now, ships always did have awnings, but normally they were just straight tent-like covers over extended posts. But they decided they needed to do something rather more. And this is what we want to get at eventually. You can see that parts of the superstructure have been extended fore and aft, and space within the cargo tanks is also changed for berthing arrangements so that we can take children to school, to sea. We're a long way from that yet, but we have come a long way. So, this is what's going on now. On board stewarding. It's a pity, it's a bit too far for us from here, I think. But if you can't come yourself, your donation would be more than welcome. So if you have a look, see, here we are. Oh, this was one of the first things that was done. A scale, an absolute scale model of her actually was in her prime. Here we are for opportunities. As I say, there are several copies of the quarterly magazine at the back there if you want to have a look when we break up. And go on that website. Please have a look at the virtual tour of the engine room. I think all of you would find that interesting. And that, ladies and gentlemen,